President Obama does it again, and he deliberately attacks Christianity. Now, he said this yesterday during the White House Easter prayer breakfast.
On Easter, I do reflect on the fact that as a Christian, I am supposed to love. And I have to say that sometimes when I listen to less than loving expressions by Christians, I get concerned.
Maybe it was Reverend Wright for 20 years. Now, this is not the first time the president has taken it upon himself to lecture Christians. Now, remember back in February when he said this while giving a speech about the rise of ISIS and radical Islam.
Remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ. Slavery and Jim Crow all too often was justified in the name of Christ.
Now, here's what I find so troubling. Now, the president is so quick to lecture Christians time and time again, but since the beginning of his administration, well, the president has gone way out of his way time and time again to defend the Muslim religion. Watch this.
The United States is not and will never be at war with Islam.
As a student of history, I also know civilization's debt to Islam. Islam has always been a part of America's story. I'm also proud to carry with me the goodwill of the American people and a greeting of peace from Muslim communities in my country. Assalamu alaikum. Islam is not part of the problem in combating violent extremism. It is an important part of promoting peace. Our enemies respect no religious freedom. Al-Qaeda's cause is not Islam. It's a gross distortion of Islam. The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. ISIL is not Islamic. No religion condones the killing of innocents, and the vast majority of ISIL's victims have been Muslim. We have reaffirmed again and again that the United States is not and never will be at war with Islam. Islam teaches peace.
Here now with reaction, author of Climate Change: The Facts, Mark Stein is back with us. You know, when he was running for office the first time, you know, the tides were going to recede. He was uniquely qualified as somebody that went to a Muslim school in Indonesia as a child to bridge the gap between these two worlds, the Western world, the Islamic world. When you listen to his attacks on Christianity, him constantly praising the future does not belong to those that slander the prophet, what is your reaction? Where is this coming from in your view?
Well, if I'd been at that prayer breakfast, I would have shouted out shame. And I think it's a pretty poor reflection, even on presumably loyal Liberal Democrats in that audience, that no one objected to it. Because it is time for people to object to it. This is part of a conscious strategy. Just before he stood up and made that condescending remark, and by the way, he's no more an expert on Christianity than he is on Islam. You got the impression from his thing about loving each other that he'd maybe seen a production of Godspell in high school, and that's about as far as it goes. But 148 young students in Kenya had just been killed, slaughtered, their bodies on the floor by Muslim fanatics who asked the students in that university, are you Christian or are you Muslim? And they let the Muslims go and they slaughtered the Christians. Now, this is a guy who's happy to draw general lessons when a black youth gets killed in Ferguson, Missouri. That apparently has wide application for black people all over America. But 148 black corpses has no general application. Well, Mr. President, hashtag Black Lives Matter when they're Christian too. And the biggest story of our time is the extinction of some of the oldest Christian communities on the planet at the hands of Islam remorselessly. You dishonor those Kenyan students in death by not identifying them as Christian, as you dishonored the Egyptians only a couple of weeks earlier.
Do you remember early on there was a piece in the New York Times by Nicholas Kristof where he said Obama, quoted with a first-rate accent, that the most beautiful sight in all the world was the Muslim call to prayer at sunset. To what extent now that all of these events have happened, do you think he was influenced by his attendance at that Muslim school in Jakarta as a youth? And what do you glean from those comments?
Well, you know, here's a guy who was essentially raised by white grandparents, and he sought I think, consciously a more exotic identity. I'm not saying that in a particularly partisan way. When Jeb Bush, who comes from the whitest white bread family in America, chooses to identify himself as Hispanic, he's also seeking consciously a more exotic identity.
But that was a mistake. I mean, in fairness to Jeb Bush.
Well, whatever. But I think you can make the case that to a certain type of person, the exotic is more appealing than the everyday.
Yeah.
And so I think in that sense, Christianity for him is something he associates with white imperialism, whereas Islam is the exotic other and it's the victim group. And the fact is that on his watch, the last Christian church in Afghanistan was razed to the ground on America's watch. The Christian community in Iraq, an American protectorate, has been exterminated on America's watch, and that is something that ought to be shameful for him. And people ought to. This isn't funny, by the way. We've seen this guy who staged this act of Rose Garden Theatre over Bo Bergdahl. It's not a small thing when the leader of a supposedly free people lies to those people about what's going on in the world.
But there seems to be a certain level of ignorance that it's not funny. You're right that he's reading a teleprompter and repeatedly says in a speech, Navy corpsman, apparently not knowing what a corpsman is, or similarly making comments about the Crusades without the knowledge and understanding that it was a Christian response to Muslim aggression and a desire to get back Christian holy sites. But he said this one thing that I want to take issue with. He said, sometimes when I listen to less than loving expressions by Christians, I get concerned. Now, he spent 20 years in this man's church, Reverend Wright.
We bombed Hiroshima, we bombed Nagasaki, and we nuked far more than the thousands in New York and the Pentagon, and we never batted an eye. Because the stuff we have done overseas is now brought right back into our own front yards. America's chickens are coming home to roost.
No, no, no. Not God bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human.
Isn't that the epitome of a less than loving comment by a Christian? He sat there for 20 years.
Yeah. Well, he apparently dozed. He was in the pews dozing through all that stuff and has no memory of it. Didn't make much impression of it.
Yeah.
I don't think in any sense he is a Christian, Sean. I think he's a social justice warrior who, like a lot of people from the cultural left, regards religion as the opiate of the rubes, to modify Marx. But I think in Obama's case, it's compounded by the fact that he does have this profound respect for Islam that leads him actually to invert the situation that's going on in the world today, so that the Christians are the problem and the Muslims who are beheading the Christians and shooting the Christians and cutting the throats of the Christians are somehow the victim group that we all need to be more sensitive to.
It's very upside down, isn't it? And for example, his treatment of Israel, and even negotiating with the Iranians, he admits that he's going to give them the bomb in 13 years, that it will be a zero breakout time. And I'm thinking, just the opposite of what an intelligent person, in my view, would do. And then he makes, Dick Cheney had an observation. He made it on the Hugh Hewitt radio show. And I want you to respond to this and ask you whether you agree with the former vice president's comments.
If you had somebody as president who wanted to take America down, who wanted to fundamentally weaken our position in the world, reduce our capacity to influence events, turn our back on our allies, and encourage our adversaries, it would look exactly like what Barack Obama is doing. I think his actions constitute, in my mind, those of the worst president we've ever had.
What's your reaction?
Yeah, I think Mr. Cheney's lifted my line. I think I said a few weeks ago, if Obama were working for the other side, what would he be doing differently? We've just turned Iran into a nuclear threshold state. Iran controls 4 Middle Eastern capitals. It controls Aden, a critical seaport. We've hollowed out and turned into failed states Libya and Yemen. America is at best a bystander in the world, and at worst colluding with some of the most dangerous and brutal, violent forces on the planet. As I said, if he were working for the other side, what would he be doing differently?
You know, I've now come to the conclusion, having studied him now going way back to 2007, Mark, there is an unknown something with Obama, an untold story. I don't know what it is. People are going to say, well, they're going to assume what I'm thinking. I don't know the answer. But everything is upside down in the world of Obama, and none of it makes a lot of sense to me, and it seems extraordinarily dangerous, both on foreign policy and even the economy, doubling the debt and all these people on food stamps and in poverty. So, all right, Mark, thank you. Good to see you.